I'm Chris Walker, Executive Director of the International Forum for Democratic Studies. Welcome to another installment of Democracy Ideas. I'm delighted to have with us today Professor Anne-Marie Brady of the University of Canterbury, Christchurch, New Zealand. Anne-Marie, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Anne-Marie, in your highly regarded book, Marketing Dictatorship, you wrote that since 1989, propaganda has been the lifeblood of the Chinese party state. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, the concept of propaganda as the lifeblood of the Chinese Communist Party and their rule is a long-standing one, but it's been really emphasised since the crisis of 1989, the student protests and then the government crackdown. And the resurgence of party control in China after that, because the Chinese government has recognised that economic development is important to political stability in China, but so is information management and having a message that unites the population.
And you mentioned the importance of economic development. I think for many observers of China, the conventional assumption not all that long ago was that economic growth would lead to liberalization, presumably also for the news media. But it hasn't quite turned out that way. Can you talk a bit about what has evolved in the Chinese media system as the country has developed economically?
Well, the Chinese government has initiated and led the commercialization of the Chinese media. I mean, the Chinese media was subsidized up until the early 90s, and now it's fully commercialized. Even the state broadcaster, CCTV, it receives privileges, monopolies in some situations, but it's not subsidized. And so the media specialists in China talk about China being between the market and then the party, and that they have to both serve the market and the readers, the audience for their material, but they also have to do so within party guidelines. And so China doesn't fit that model that we've assumed about how, for example, the development of a middle class would put pressure on the government to engage in significant political change. China has managed to create a media which is diverse, that has greatly expanded the range of subjects that can be discussed, but set the boundaries that remain in place of certain no-go zones, because you can't have, as some of the famous early theorists on propaganda and persuasion, people like Herbert Laswell and Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays all argued, you can't have successful propaganda without censorship.
It's also been remarkable that in the age of globalization and the internet's growth, that China has managed to devise an approach that can manage information in a meaningful way. And this is in an environment where there are 600 million internet users. How is it possible that China has managed to maintain meaningful control of information that matters today?
Well, the internet is actually a great tool for a government that wants to increase the level of awareness and understanding of its message, because it means that more people can have access to your information than ever before, and also that technology makes it easier to censor than ever before. I mean, they can know who's going online and looking at which sites. They can seal off certain areas of a city and say, you guys don't get to see New York Times, whereas if you're at a university or a hotel, those people, will get other privileges. So the internet, for a country like China that has the resources to invest in the relevant software and hardware, is a real boon for what they're trying to achieve. And they are actually advising other authoritarian governments on how to do this and how to do it well.
Anne-Marie, China has also invested quite a bit beyond its borders and its media into outlets such as CCTV, Radio China International, and Xinhua. How do you see those outlets making an impact in the global information space?
Well, the aim of them has always been to promote China, when they were first set up to promote what the government called New China. The contemporary aim is to improve China's global image, because the Chinese government's very conscious that in many countries there are very negative and indeed even hostile perceptions of China. The Chinese government feels that it gets a very bad press in the Western media, and so they have the resources now as a result of their economic growth to do an even better job at getting China's voice out to the world, and Xi Jinping calls it telling a good story about China.
And finally, another dimension of China's international outreach that's gotten some attention over the years are the Confucius Institutes that have proliferated rapidly across the globe in the United States and elsewhere. These are presumably ways to communicate China's culture. How do you see the Confucius Institutes and their role, especially in the academic settings in which they tend to operate?
Well, they're often put on a parallel with Alliance Française or Goethe Institute or the British Council, but there's a really big difference, is that those are all independent institutions. So it is I think it's a real problem that the Confucius Institutes are located within universities and schools, because they are a part of a deliberate project to shape and guide and limit perceptions on China and discussions on China. And the whole nature of the university is that it's an environment where all ideas and points of view can be debated and discussed, and that there aren't limits other than mutual respect. So the Confucius Institutes are having a deleterious effect on debate on China issues internationally. And it's a real pity that, there is a real need to understand China better in this country and other countries. There is a real need for more people to be learning Chinese. It's a real shame that the US education system can't put the money in itself, then it has to rely on the Chinese government to fund that expansion of Chinese language programs.
Anne-Marie Brady, thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure.